Well, good morning and welcome to Mirador Television. And this, let's see, it's Tuesday morning, isn't it? And I've titled this "The Passing of Two Giants," one in media, one in sport. The one has seen George Alagiah. The other is Trevor Francis. And lurking behind Trevor Francis is Philip Meredith. Good morning, Philip.
Good morning, Keith. And yes, what a sad double.
Absolutely. It sometimes happens in this way, though, doesn't it? People sort of go together, as it were, or in little groups.
That's right. In my opinion, being of a certain age myself, both of them died in their late
60s.
So George was 67.
Right, yes.
When he succumbed to bowel cancer, having fought it for so long and so bravely. And Trevor Francis was 69 and apparently was found dead in his apartment in Spain, having had a fatal heart attack.
Oh, that's a very sad way to end, I always think.
Well, the number of footballers, young or older, who succumb to heart attacks is actually quite scary.
I suppose also there's increasing brain damage as well from heading the ball so frequently.
You know, it's hard to think what else they can do. You're never going to stop a soccer player heading a ball, surely. That's ridiculous.
I suppose
the only option is some sort of head guard.
Well, I suppose, or in some ways, I suppose we have to be very careful about the nanny state. If you go into professional football, then you know the risks. And I mean, if you go into any professional sport, in any of them, aren't there?
Yes, you must be aware of the risks. I mean, just carrying on with the heading and brain damage thing. I mean, the balls these days are so much lighter. Imagine, I mean, in a previous program, you waxed lyrical quite rightly about Stanley Matthews, Sir Stanley Matthews. Now, in his day, it was a heavy, soggy leather ball.
Yes. In fact, I recall that they used to refer to it as a case ball. It was leather with a rubber tube inside.
That is absolutely right. And that's how they were inflated.
Indeed.
So we're dealing with a very different, forgive the pun, ball game today. I mean, Jeff Astle, that famous West Bromwich and England centre forward, he succumbed to appalling brain damage. And in those days, they didn't associate it with heading the ball. But in retrospect, medics have said that's exactly what it was.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that was his forte, heading the ball as a traditional number 9. But
do you have any idea what percentage of football players, professional football players, succumb to this particular thing? I mean, is it a high percentage, a low percentage? Do they take their chances, or?
I believe that both the brain damage, whether it's cancer or dementia, and the cardiac issue are still fairly low percentages. But the cardiac issue affects players of all ages. And often while they're playing. I mean, we remember, do we not, the Ericsson, who collapsed during an international game.
Yes.
With that cardiac arrest.
Mm-hmm.
He now plays with a pacemaker, which limits the clubs and leagues he can play in. Manchester City had a very popular African midfielder who just dropped dead mid-game from a heart attack. So it happens even with the supposedly fittest of people. And that's the cruelty. These people are or have been very fit people. But anyway, as you have, I think, very appropriately called our little chat, to use Mr. Barton's word, the passing of two giants. I mean, this came about, didn't it, yesterday?
Yes.
I contacted you because I knew it would interest you.
Yes.
As a journalist and presenter yourself, that George had passed away. And he always came across, not only as, in my opinion, a superb presenter, as well as a very photogenic man, but a very charming and very modest man.
You met him?
And purely by accident, I met him once on a train coming out of all places, Portsmouth, travelling back Brighton way. And I recognised him and thought, do I or don't I? And being me, I said, hello, Mr. Allegaya. Forgive me interrupting and tell me to butt out if you want peace and quiet. But I'm very pleased to see you and meet you. And we chatted away for pretty much the entire journey until I got off earlier than him. And he was a really lovely guy. He didn't make one mention of his condition. And this was definitely, certainly during his first bout, which began as grade 4. And by the time he passed away, I've read that there was very little of his liver left because it attacked the liver as secondary cancer.
Now, let me ask you this, because you actually were on the blower. Actually, we don't use the phone anymore, do we? We do it through email and electronically. But you were on to me straight away when you heard about George. And
yes.
It seems to me that one question that I need to ask you is: do you are you impressed and do you like the gentlemanly people that you see on the screen, whether in fact they're reading the news or whether they're doing something else on the television screen? But generally speaking, if you know that somebody is a decent sort of bloke, does it attract you rather more than to others?
Oh yes, very much. I mean, let's unsex this. Presenters, male and female, many of them annoy me intensely. The program I loathe but know about because my wife watches it religiously is breakfast television, whether it's BBC or ITV. And I find certainly two of the presenters on breakfast television on the BBC beyond the pale. And I'll be called sexist, but they're both female. And the one that really angered me, and a fuss was made about it, but she carried on regardless. There's a woman who began as a sports presenter called Sally Nugent. She now does the main presentation on what they call the red sofa. And there was the anniversary of the Dam Busters. And she called the Dam Busters raid. And it caused an absolute furore with veterans. Infamous. She said the infamous Dam Busters raid on national television. And complaints poured in on all levels of media immediately. Now
Like
yes, absolutely. Infamous. Good heavens. That one of the bravest, most advanced technological achievements ever, all fighting for this country's freedom in the darkest of times. Infamous. Disgraceful word. She blamed the auto cue. Well, quite frankly, if you're being paid the fortune that they are, relatively speaking, to read an auto cue, surely if you have some intelligence, you can yourself disagree with the auto cue. But that's what she said. That's just one example. So yes, I am extremely selective about who I enjoy watching and listening to, and George Alagaya was at the top.
yeah,
Absolute top.
I agree.
He was, the tributes that have been paid to him have been enormous, and including his colleagues at BBC. I mean, a woman who presents, but also presents on Radio 5, is, I think, called Naga Munchetti, who did a superb presentation a few years ago on the D-Day anniversary at the memorial they set up, they built on the French coast. And I hear that she was presenting her own Radio 5 program yesterday, and she just broke down in tears because she just heard the news. And I heard Sophie Rayworth, who I do rather like. I think she's a wholesome presenter. She was visibly upset when remembering him. So quite rightly, they were all extremely fond of him.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'll find, Philip, that behind the closed doors, as it were, is people who are good at what they do and sensitive and so on are admired by their colleagues. Those that seem to be quite popular because they're a roustabout, like me, for instance, is behind the closed doors, not so popular with their colleagues.
Yes.
Not what you see is necessarily what you get.
Well, you've brought me on to why I wanted to ask this of you, because you agreed with me, didn't you, on our text exchange yesterday, that he was a good guy.
Yes, indeed.
But you actually said one of the few.
Yeah.
Now, you may not want to expand on that, but that interested me. I mean, there are no names necessary, but do you, and in your own experience, regard the good guys, male or female, as being in the minority in the business?
Yes.
Right.
I mean, I say that very quickly and very, very definitely. There is a large, widespread dog-eat-dog approach by many people who, particularly if they're on the way up, and they don't care who they hurt in getting to their goal. And often, many of them are not that talented.
That's the mischief, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, somebody like Alagaya, to make it to the top, I think is a real triumph, because quite often it's the nice guys that don't make it to the top. That they are elbowed out of the way by those who are determined to get there. One of the things that really bothers me is that quite often this approach is supported by administrations. I mean, people I will mention, for instance, is the BBC have elbowed aside Sue Barker, absolutely superb professional, Now, without mentioning any names, so that I'm not embarrassing anybody, but some of the replacements that have taken over from Sue Barker are far from professional. One of them doesn't listen to the answers to the questions. Another will actually ask a question that is 5 minutes long and then be surprised when they get the answer yes or no. There are lots of things which they shouldn't be doing, and they are not trained, or they refuse to follow the professional standards. And that is widespread throughout the industry. People get to where they want to go, not because of talent. Now, admittedly, I'm a meritocrat. I'm biased. But nonetheless, I think that my bias gives me the opportunity to say yay or nay.
Well, yes, that's a definite, which is why I'm asking you about it. You know, something that Richard and I find fascinating about you is not just your personality, but what you've done in your life. So, you know, it's a two-way street. You seem to find us interesting, thankfully, but it's the same on the other way around. But did you say you were a meritocrat?
Yes.
Yes.
I believe in merit. Yeah. Meritocracy.
Well, yes, and shouldn't that be the norm?
One would think so, but I was in at a lunch, and the people close to me were names in the industry, and I said that I was a meritocrat. We weren't actually talking about broadcasting; we were talking about Parliament, where I think that we've got a very, very poor parliamentary makeup because of ratios. We have to have X number of women and X number of black people and X number of gays and so on and so forth. I want people who can do the job, full stop. I don't care what color they are, what sexuality they are, or whatever. I like people who can do the job. And he sneered at me and said, oh, you're one of those meritocrats. Now, meritocracy is like anything else. It's got flaws, but generally speaking, I think it's not a bad way to set a standard.
Well, to me, it's base camp. It is a fundamental principle, or should be. It's not just in your old industry this happens, by the way. It happens at the bar, and it's getting worse. You've heard me moan on about the standard of advocacy and whatever. And yes, I do moan on about it because I find it very sad. But there are still chambers nationwide, but inevitably predominantly in London, where whatever discipline you're working in, where you went to school, where you went to university, what strings you can pull, what contacts you have, still mean there's untalented or under-talented dead wood compared with what they could have had. So it's not just in your old industry, sadly. Someone I know who I'm very close to worked for the old Channel 4 when they were on Charlotte Street.
Mm-hmm.
And she eventually was elbowed out. A new broom boss came in, a very ambitious man of a certain faith, very pushy, and just bit by bit edged her out. And she'd been there for years. And it's hard not to feel aggrieved because of that, but it happens, sadly. But an example, I'm with you all the way on Sue Barker. Very popular with the public. Instance how well received she's always been at Wimbledon, both as a player and a pundit. But Test match special, okay? all right, when I first started listening to it, it was entirely male dominated. That I accept. Schoolboy humour, Johners and Aggers and toffee put into Johnson's mouth before he went on, and you know, Botham standing at slip, legs apart, waiting for a tickle. He didn't just quite get his leg over there, the stumps, did he? You know, I mean, just fabulous schoolboy stuff. Then, of course, it began to change. And in my opinion, not for the better. But the one example I always remember, because I never ever thought I would ever agree with the man, was when they got rid of Geoffrey Boycott. Mm-hmm. And they got rid of Geoffrey Boycott, who people didn't like because he spoke it literally as it was, and he knew the game. He was an arrogant, narcissistic man. I mean, that spoof, I don't know whether you ever watched it, but they did a spoof on him. Agnew did a spoof whereby he and the stat man pretended to get a telegraph message from the International Cricket Board that said that they were demoting every century scored by a player in what were not full test matches. Now, one of Boycott's centuries had been on a rebel tour game, and that would mean that he didn't get to his 100 centuries when he did. Right. But he fell for it hook, line, and sinker. It was absolutely hilarious to watch. It's on YouTube. Sorry to mention another channel. And behind them, there's Agnew keeping a totally straight face. Boycott is chunnering away. He just won't forget it. He won't do the commentary anymore. He's just chunnering away about this. Bloody idiot, all this stuff. Behind them is the producer, who is wetting himself. I mean, Boycott can't see him. And then Agnew couldn't stand it anymore and said, Geoffrey, sorry, stop chunnering. It's a complete wind-up. And he said, Agnew, you muppet, you this, you that, you're meant to be a friend. Honestly. Well, where I never thought I'd agree with Boycott was when he was sidelined, to use a gentle word, to make way for a certain ex-England female cricketer of colour. He said on record that he'd been very badly let down by those who should have stood up for him. And by that, he meant Agnew, who is now, frankly, just a yes man. And he said, this may be equality, but it certainly isn't quality.
Yes.
And I agree with him. And it's proven to be very much not quality, to the extent that, ridiculously, I don't listen to TIS anymore. I just don't listen to it. Sad, but that's me, you know.
Well, I think you're right.
Well, shall we?
Sorry?
No, I interrupted you, Keith. Carry on, please.
I was just going to say that, of course, I've trained broadcast journalists around the world, and I quite often had along with me a chap who, unfortunately, is now in the great newsroom in the Sky, Graham Adicott, who was a very, very nice man, but a man who was extremely good at what he did. He was actually the mainstay of Thames Television during its existence. But Graham used to say to these younger people, and mostly from other countries, you must understand your television audience. And when you're looking at broadcasting, there are three things you must remember. One is audience, two is audience, and the third is audience.
Yeah.
The trouble is that particularly those people who are the grey people, you don't see on the screen, but who are pulling the strings don't understand the business that they're in. They do not understand broadcasting. Now, I'm grateful that I mean there is much to be desired about American broadcasting, but I cut my teeth in Canada, and I had an executive producer who he not quite literally, but almost would send myself and another chap who were just starting out in the business out each day, almost in tears, blood streaming down our backs. He was a vicious bastard, to say the least. But boy, did he teach me what it was all about. We don't do that anymore. We're all terribly nice, and we must be considerate. It's not the way to excellence.
No, and that's that. Again, this is not unique to journalism and broadcasting. That rather like you and I were agreeing that you go into a professional sport aware of the risks. You know, if you're going to go into the sort of work that you did all those years, you can't expect an easy ride. And if you come across somebody who is your boss or your trainer, as per the example you're talking about, you can't expect to be mollycoddled. That's how you learn. And it brings on yet another cliche. If you can't stand the heat, get out the kitchen.
That's right.
Because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
But and that's how the best barristers have learned.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's how some of the best broadcasters have too. But the unfortunate thing is that broadly throughout the broadcast industry, the head chef is just a nice, soft, gentle chap.
It's not just your field. The men in suits, the grey men, the ones who have no empathy, no understanding of the end result, which in your instance is audience.
Yes, you don't have to be mean and miserable to actually become a professional. I mean, there is a case in point of a man who was superb at what he did, and yet, as you discovered personally and throughout the industry, his reputation was he was a gentleman, and he was considerate, and he was decent, so you can be like that and still be very successful if you understand your business, you understand what it is that's required.
Well, his other achievement, dare I say it, was that he was a man of colour.
Indeed.
And there will have been, I'm sorry, even at the BBC, there will have been a level of scepticism, shall we say, but he overcame all of that by the sheer pleasantness and strength of his personality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you mentioned a man of colour, the other one that I did have a little bit to do with when I was working at Gray's Inn Road for Reuters is underneath us was ITN. And Trevor McDonald was frequently there.
Now you're talking. Now. What a fabulous bloke.
Delightful man. Yeah. We used to enjoy a little restaurant next door to the ITN building on Gray's Inn Road, but I knew his producer quite well. And he would say, you haven't seen Trevor, have you? I said, no. He said, well, I think he's gone down to the Oval. He said he looked through the news list. He said, oh, not much on today. I think I'll go down and see the cricket. And he would come back and he would do the evening news, and he would do it professionally and he would do it well without having been anywhere near the newsroom. But he was exceptional. He was an exceptional man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, on the funny side and showing how humble the man was, Lenny Henry set up a meeting with him when Lenny Henry, played Trevor McDonald. So it was Trevor McDonald being interviewed by Lenny Henry as Trevor McDonald, his character. And it was just hilarious. You know, they just never stopped laughing.
Yeah.
So there he was with his alter ego, Trevor McDonald, and he loved it, absolutely loved it. Well,
but once again, somebody who was kind of character.
yes. Well,
yeah.
Sadly, I never met him, but he came across as that.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, he more than George, I think Trevor was iconic. Very few people can be called that, but he was iconic in so many ways.
Yes.
Anyway, talking of icons, shall we move on to Trevor Francis?
We shall. Indeed, we shall.
Now, I was about to say Sir Trevor Francis, but...
Sorry, I got the wrong one, yeah. Right, okay.
There's the man.
Yeah.
The most expensive UK footballer in 1979, £1 million. Transferred to Nottingham Forest from, I think, Birmingham City. Brian Clough always told him, I didn't pay £1 million for you. I paid £999,999 because he wanted to take the pressure off Trevor. He didn't want him to think he was £1 million footballer. Classic Clough. But you see, again, in a previous programme, Richard Barton and I were discussing Trevor Francis by chance because a question posed by Richard was who scored for Nottingham Forest when they won the European Cup? And I remembered it so vividly. It was Trevor Francis with a diving header, and they beat Malmo 1-0. And I always remembered that. These things stick in your mind.
Yeah.
I mean, he was at Manchester City, my club, briefly. City paid over £1 million for him, but he had to leave because City's finances fell apart. Those were the days.
Yeah.
So he left and he went to, I think, Sheffield Wednesday. But again, for somebody still so relatively young who's been such a fit man all his life, and also, we're told, reading the tributes, as I have this morning, another consummate gentleman,
Yeah.
to die suddenly of a heart attack is very sad. Is very sad. And to happen so soon, even perhaps within the same 24-hour period as George, as you said yourself, Keith, these sadnesses happen in batches.
They do indeed.
Maybe there's a number 3.
Well,
trouble comes in threes, I've always been led to believe.
Yes, and I'm sure that we actually manufacture it in our mind, but it always seems to be that way.
Yes, I won't take up anybody's time, but I can cite a number of examples when there's been a third. But if that happens, I then breathe a sigh of relief because I'm hoping there won't be a fourth.
Yes,
you know.
I suppose there's that about it. But tell me this, Philip. The Mail actually this morning, in paying tribute to Trevor Francis, has said he was the first £1 million footballer, and now this morning Mahapi of PSG is going to the Saudis for £259 million. I mean, that seems to me to be totally and utterly ridiculous, these figures that are bandied around.
Well, I read a reference to that Mbappe, who is actually not as good a player as Trevor was. No way is he as good a player. But Mbappe is going to the Saudis, which of itself is debatable, given their human rights records and the like. But yes, for 259 times what Forest paid for Trevor. And I sense the point you're making, and if I'm right, I agree with you, that it's just completely out of hand.
Yeah.
It's obscene.
But you're a footballer, and I'm not. Tell me this: they are amassing. I mean, they got the manager from previous of Aston Villa and of Rangers. Was it Rangers? Yes, in Scotland. And the former, what was he? He was a former Manchester United player, wasn't he? You know what I'm talking about. I just can't think of his name.
Do you mean in Saudi?
Well, he's gone to Saudi.
Ronaldo?
As a manager.
Oh, as a manager?
Yeah.
Well, now you're informing me now. I know about the players who've gone.
Yeah.
Well,
he's gone, and he was a very distinguished player. Was the manager of Aston Villa up until last October, and then was sacked because of
Gerrard.
That's right, Steven Gerrard.
Steven Gerrard, Liverpool, not United, Liverpool.
Was he? Yes, that's right. So he was, but
definitely not United. I can assure you.
Right. Now, tell me this: that they are amassing these players into their league, but are they really just going to play against one another?
Yes, because those players will not be able to play, obviously, for the Saudi national side. So
no, they won't. But
the likes of Ronaldo, Mbappe, and there's two or three others who have gone. I can't recall. They just play against each other. It'll be a bit like that Scottish. No, not Scottish. There's an island, a British island, with two teams on it. And I watched a documentary about this. I'm ashamed I can't remember where this is. It might be one of the Scottish islands, but I don't think it is. But there are only two teams on the island. They both share a stadium, so-called, and they both play each other every week. And that's all they do. They just play each other.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, I know where it is. It's Gibraltar.
Ah, yes, that makes sense.
It's Gibraltar. That's all they do. I mean, I'm sorry, but variety is meant to be the spice of life, and there's no variety there. But no, I mean, these are players becoming past their best, who are in it for these shed loads of money.
Yeah.
I mean, another one who's gone but to the States is, of course, Lionel Messi.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because he got so sick of it at Paris Saint-Germain because he was rubbing shoulders with Neymar, the Brazilian, who is an arrogant so-and-so apparently, and a real sort of daddy's boy who manages him, and Mbappe. So poor old Lionel, who was Barcelona to his boots, he's stuck at PSG. The fans, I have read, turned against him. He's now gone over to Miami. I think it's with David Beckham's outfit, into Miami.
Uh-huh.
And again, I'm confident that's for the money.
Yeah. I mean,
it's as if he said, right. Go ahead, Keith.
Carry on.
It's as if Messi, in my view, He won the World Cup with Argentina. That was the absolute acme of what he wanted to do. And now he's just winding down a bit.
Yeah.
And frankly, who can blame him?
Yeah. Well, I suppose blame is the wrong word. But I mean, part of the reason that you were stirred to give me a shout and say, "Hey, listen, I think this is worth talking about," and you are absolutely right. Good news knows, Philip, is really in many ways in talking about these good guys. It gives us an opportunity to look at some of the flaws in the professional game, and not only the professional game of soccer, but in the professional world of broadcasting, and for us to be able to openly discuss it for good reason. And really, in many ways, it is to put on a pedestal Alagaya and Francis.
And so they should be. And I'll give you a contrary example. On the island of Madeira, they've erected a statue to Cristiano Ronaldo. Because Cristiano Ronaldo, as I'm sure you know, is Portuguese. He's from Madeira.
Right.
Now, he is undoubtedly a great player. Zlatan Ibrahimovic was equally a superb player, but they are both, and quite rightly, deeply unpopular people. Deeply unpopular. I mean, I mentioned Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi is meant to be a very modest, easygoing guy, in stark contrast to the other two I've mentioned.
Yeah.
Anyway, both of them have had statues erected. Madeira for Ronaldo, and I think Malmo, ironically, in Sweden, for Ibrahimovic. Both statues have been defaced.
Really?
They've been defaced even on home ground because they're unpopular, even there. So that is the contrast between them, Messi, and the likes of Trevor. If and when Ronaldo, all right, Ibrahimovic is finally retired, and I didn't read one tribute, not one tribute. Arrogant man. It'll be the same with Ronaldo, in my view, because it literally is all about him.
Yeah.
Whereas you read the tributes about Trevor. Another example, actually, on the good side, is Shane Warne. People were shocked to find that he had been found dead over in Thailand, I think it was. He wasn't just a wonderful leg spin bowler. He was a gutsy cricketer, but he was a good guy. He was very, very popular and did a lot for English cricket, particularly with Hampshire. So, you know.
I was a very, very talented cricketer. Yeah.
Oh, extraordinary. Extraordinary man. And he could bat. He could bat. I mean, that series in 2005, where we won the Ashes back under Michael Vaughan. Michael, there are too many of you round here, Vaughan. Vaughan nearly won them the third test match, my recollection is. He batted lower down the order and they just couldn't get him out. And in the end, they got him out for about 78. And it was neck and neck because of that innings. And I think it was the one at Old Trafford that ended in a draw with Glenn McGrath blocking the last ball. But hey, maybe that's number three. Maybe it was Shane, George, and Trevor.
Well, it could be. It could be. I mean, he has figured prominently in the last little while in the news, hasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the admiration is there. Well, Philip, we've had a good actually 3/4 of an hour chatting about this, and very interesting it is. And I'm always delighted to have a vehicle for your views, which are always very sane and sensible, but very deep, and actually show a deep understanding of what happens in our society and how it reflects. But I wonder if I could just tell you a little story, which is about rugby, actually, and not about football or broadcasting. But there is a book about to be published, which I've been invited to contribute, and it's about a rugby football club in Vancouver, in British Columbia, called the Scribes,
Yeah.
and which I started. Along with two others, I started it. Anyway, that's a long story. But when we started it, because we were in Vancouver, the other teams were mostly made up of ex-American football players who take a very different attitude towards sport than we do in cricket and rugby in this country. So we decided that what we would do is, at the beginning of each match, we would do Ring Around the Roses. That was in 1966, and the club still does Ring Around the Roses before every match. Apparently, they appeared in the sevens, where the referee said, "You're not doing that," and they said, "All right, well, we're not going to play."
You see, you are a hotbed for these fabulous anecdotes. Well, Keith, you pay me great compliments. I'm not sure I'm quite as sage as you think, but thank you for that anyway.
Well,
it's been a nice 50 minutes.
Very good fun. But also amongst the fun, both you and Richard managed to get out some very good information. I mean, you reminded me of a number of things this morning, talking about both George and about Trevor Francis, and that's the very positive part amongst some of the laughs that we have and some of the memories we're able to share. Long may you keep going, and I hope.
Of course. Of course I will. But it's been an example, in my view, of a very edible two-way street here. You know, we spark off each other, which is the way it should be. If it were just me as some talking head and you just sitting there falling asleep, there'd be no point.
No, you know. It's well. I use this little thing at the bottom of my thing now. To talk is good, and I think that's absolutely right. Conversation and good conversation brings out the best in us.
Well, I will continue to watch out for live subjects, no pun intended, and maybe we can find something else of interest to discuss.
Oh, I'm sure there are 1,000 things. I think I told you that one of my favorite television programs in the 1960s was an American program called Dragnet. And it was, do you remember Dragnet?
I'm afraid I do.
Sergeant Joe Friday.
That's right. My goodness.
He used to end off every episode by saying, "There are a million stories in the naked city. This is just one of them."
Yeah, that's right.
Between us, we have a million stories, even though we're not naked. This is just one of them.
That is a dreadful thought, Keith.
Luckily, we don't impose that one.
Just on your point about my words, sagacity and knowledge of life and whatever, and it's the same with Richard Barton. A lot of it stems from background. You know, neither he nor I were silver spooners. Far from it. And there's an innate pride in what you can achieve from, shall we say, low beginnings. I mean, I will leave him to tell you the story, and I want you to ask him about this sometime. When he was offered a tenancy in a very, very leading set in London. I mean, a real top-notch, big-name set. And he turned it down. And I want you to ask him, it's not for me to tell the story, but it sums Richard Barton up. When you get a minute, on screen or not, you ask him why he turned down that tenancy. And that will be a proper insight into Richard's character.
Right.
Anyway.
Perhaps the decency of approach to one's profession that we've been talking about this morning with Allegheny and Francis. So
absolutely.
We shall see you hopefully before the end of the week.
Yeah, it depends on him. You know, as I observed yesterday, vis-a-vis your lovely lunch idea, it's a matter of pinning him down.
I'm
available. I'm available.
Great. I'm going to nail his foot to the floor for that one occasion.
Well, it's a very small foot. You'll need to take very careful aim. Bye-bye.
Lovely to have you. And we'll talk soon. Okay, that's. I shall be back in a little while with a look at the front pages. And for the moment, it is now 10:09. And today, by the way, the temperature is going to rise to about 19 degrees. There is a gentle breeze to start off with, and it's about midday or a little after, we can expect some rain. That's the scene at the moment. But the main story today really is that George Allegheny has died, and so has Trevor Francis, the footballer. The other stories are varied. The one in the Mail, for instance, is about lawyers charging up to £10,000 to make fake asylum claims, and that always is the case where there are people that take advantage of these situations without any moral conscience whatsoever. But there we are. All right, we'll catch you in a little while. Toodle pip.